I'm Lacy Davis, and I live in Pittsburg, Texas, and have lived here many years. I I was born down between here and Gilmer, just a short distance from here. But since 1918, I've lived in Pittsburg, and I joined the church here in Pittsburg, the Methodist Church, on April the 15th, 1923.
What
And
brought your family to Pittsburg?
Beg pardon?
What brought your family to Pittsburg?
Uh, I guess my grandfather. My grandfather owned a big farm down there, and my dad helped him with his gin and sawmill in it. And they moved to town. He sold his place down there, so my dad decided he'd buy a place out here, which he did. And he farmed there until he got a job uptown, and since then he's been worked here in town all this time. So I guess that brought us up here as much as anything else.
What was his name?
My daddy's name was Clarence Alonzo Davis, called Lonnie. He grew up as Lonnie Davis all his years. He worked at hardware stores up here most of the time, but later on he went into business for himself, selling fertilizer to the farmers around here, and then he started repairing lawnmowers. So I started working in a department store here in Pittsburg, selling phonograph records. They were sold 35 cents a piece then. My job was just to play the records, and if anybody wanted one for me to play it, I'd play it for them. If they wanted to buy one, I'd call one of the clerks, they'd come up and sell it to them. Then the next thing I did, I started working at a shoe shop, not repairing shoes, but selling candy and Cokes at a shoe shop on Saturdays. And then I started working for the grocery stores and worked there for several years. And about 1936, I decided I needed to get a profession or a job of some kind that I could make a living at, raise a family. So I took a correspondence course in electronics, repair radios for that matter. I opened up a radio shop in 1937 and operated it till 1941. And same time I started my radio shop, or started my, as far as a correspondence course, I took a post office examination as a substitute mail walking carrier here in town. And in 1940, I finally got that job. And then in 1941, my wife, my girlfriend, and I had planned to get married for Christmas. And the Sunday of Pearl Harbor, we were riding around trying to make up our mind whether to get married that Christmas or wait till after school was out. She was teaching school down near Atlanta, Texas. So when we heard the news, then I said, I can't get married now. People accuse me of getting married to keep out of the Army, because I know I've got to go. So I went into the Army, left my job in the post office. Only one in this post office who had to go into military service. I spent 3 years, 7 months, and 1 day in the Army. And I was in an outfit that we call Sound and Flash. We were not actual combat troops, although we suffered as we were going over from England to France shortly after D-Day. Our boat was torpedoed. We lost about from a third to half of our men at one shot there. So I went on into service, and I was tech sergeant, next to the highest rank in my platoon, but the master sergeant who was above me was killed in that time, and I automatically had to take over. And I had to go over into France, leading a group of new men who had not been trained in our type of work. I had to train them, had to do the operation that we were supposed to do, and shortly after they called me in for a formation and gave me the Bronze Star Medal for doing that at that time. We went on through the war and at the end of the war, I was supposed to come home. To they said I was coming home for a little training, then I was going to Pacific. But the atom bomb stopped that. So I didn't have to go to Pacific. I came home earlier than most of the other boys in my outfit, but I got out quicker by being here, by coming home, because they canceled everything and discharging everybody. I joined the church, I believe I said April 15th, 1923. I have served as several things in the church. The first thing I did, I was called upon to be assistant secretary of the Sunday school. I was a little older than most of the people who were in my age group. I mean, I stayed in Pittsburg while most of them went to college. So they finally put me into teaching a Sunday school class. And I had a bunch of boys. Among them was Dick White and L.B. Broach, who finally became a preacher.
Were they good students?
Well, I would say yes. But they were in my class for a short time, not too long. Later on, I was in the Good Citizens class, which I'm still a member, and someone asked me to teach the class one day. Well, I taught it, which was my mistake. The next thing I knew, I was teaching off and on that class, and then a young man came to me and asked me, says, the second mile class wants you to teach the lesson next Sunday at their class. Well, I went over there and started teaching that class. And after the class was over, he said, I guess you know you've been elected teacher of this class. So for 10 years, I taught the second mile class here.
Were you happy doing that, or did you feel coerced?
Well, I don't know. I'd rather they'd say.
Okay.
But finally, the Methodist Church started a new series. They went from the Bible to story writers. This is about 1970, as I recall. And I told them I could not teach a class that type of lesson, and I would have to resign, which I did. I went on to the Good Citizen class again, and it wasn't long after then till the teacher who was there, who was an attorney, a good teacher, decided he wanted to quit. I don't know whether he was quitting hoping I'd take over or what, but anyway, I was asked to teach, and I said, no, I've had enough of it. And they said, well, I agreed to teach it 1 month. At the end of that time, they said, you've got to stay. Well, I stayed 10 years there. So I taught Sunday school classes, adult Sunday school classes, for 20 years in this church. I have served as a lay leader. I have served as chairman of the board. And I guess my last position was historian, but I gave up that job because I couldn't get the cooperation of most of the church in saving the materials.
And how long have you been the technology expert?
Let's say my wife was a genealogy expert. Shortly after Ron and Ann, my daughter over here, they got married, and Ron had a brother in military service in South Carolina. So my wife and Ann got together, and they came to us and told us that we're going to South Carolina to visit Ron's brother. Said, if you and Ron want to come along, it's okay. Well, we went over there, and we got to Warrenton, Georgia, and it so happened that my family, a great uncle of mine, had received a letter from a distant relative in Warrenton, Georgia, and he told them a few things about my family history. And when we got almost there, I said, well, I think I'm going to drive off the highway and go to that town. So I went there. I went to the courthouse first, and I didn't go in. I saw a bunch of old men sitting out on the benches outside out there. I said, I'm going to talk to these men. So I went out there and I told them, I says, I'm looking for descendants or somebody of a Davis family that used to live here. He said, what was his name? I said, Bill Davis. Oh, he was never here. I said, he was state representative. Oh no, you're talking about E.P. Davis, F in Parnell. So he said, if you're looking at brick building right behind the courthouse, you'll find his son and grandson who are attorneys there. And says, I think you'll find out what you're looking for right there. So we went there and we started, and Jane had already started researching family history. So she did most of the research. I went along and took the photos, copied photos, copied church histories and family histories. That's most of what I did.
You joined the church in 1923.
Right.
Was there some special event that April that caused you to join then?
They were having a revival at the church at that particular time. And they had a visiting minister, as well as I recall. I don't think the regular pastor was preaching. But they had I guess it's something like you have now, classes of young people trying to get them to join the church. So I was in a group there, and we had a song leader there who led that group. And one day he told us, he said, I'm going to teach you a song in Chinese that you sang in your church here. And that song went something like this. Danya ti kwa chi, Danya ti kwa chi, why shall we oh fi oh, Danya ti kwa chi, Danya ti kwa chi, Danya ti kwa chi, why shall we oh fi oh, Danya ki ti kwa chi, which is bringing in the sheaves, bringing in the sheaves. We shall come rejoicing, bringing in the sheaves, bringing in the sheaves, bringing in the sheaves. We shall come rejoicing, bringing in the sheaves. Now it's been some 80 some odd years, I imagine, since I learned that, but I still remember that song. And I talked to some of the other folks who maybe didn't join the church there, but was here at church at that time, and they remember that song too.
Who are some of the pastors that you remember from your time in the church?
Well, Brother Cross was the pastor when I joined the church. We had one of a number of different ones. Reverend Brock was here, and when Reverend Brock was here, he had a son that was in the MIF. My children were about that age, so we became active in the MYF work, although we were not the official sponsors of that group. But my wife's mother and daddy had a farm down south of Cason. We had built a cabin down there and had a lake down there. So we invited this group of these youngsters to go down there for what they call retreat. They'd go down there and try to plan their program for the next year. They'd spend the night. The boys would sleep out in the woods on cots or mattresses, and the girls would stay in the cabin. So we did that 3 or 4 years, and they really got a kick out of it. Occasionally the pastor would come down there, and his wife would come down there and stay a while at night, but they never spent the night with us. But there were 2 or 3 things that happened down there. Every afternoon, about sundown, the group wanted to build a bonfire out there. So they cleared off a place, built a bonfire, and 1 or 2 of them went out and got a couple of old boards and built a cross out there. And they went around this bonfire, sitting around there, and and they began to sing the songs which young people sang at that time. They got over into the songs that we sang in church. And then first one another, some of the children youth began to testify. And there were some of the best what do you call them,
Testimonies.
testifying
Testimonies.
was done out there around that bonfire among those young people that would surprise anyone to have seen it or been there. But we enjoyed them having them down there, and I think they enjoyed being there. But Brother my mind slipped now, but I remember the preachers. Brother Dudley was here at the time, about just before the time of our 100th church anniversary. He was here. I'm afraid to say something I get wrong there. Weldon Morton was here. Jane grew up in the Baptist church, and we married while I was in service because we didn't want to wait till after the war was over. We married before I went overseas. And we had gone a few times to the Methodist church. After we came home, and one day she asked me, says, Lacy, would you go with me up to talk to the preacher? I said, yes. She didn't say what for, and I didn't ask her. We went up there, and she told the preacher, says, would you write to Baptist Church in Hot Springs, Arkansas? She had been working up there before I came home. And get my membership. I want to join your church down here. He says, they will not send your membership down here, but says, I'll write them and tell them that you are joining this church, and they can write you off their rolls. So she had been active in the church when Mrs. Mrs. Charles Winkle was organist here back in those days when the youth girls were growing up. They'd all had piano music. We had given them some voice lessons. They all sang, they all played the piano. And Ms. Winkle said, why don't the girls take organ lessons? Says, I won't charge them a thing in the world. So the three girls started to take organ lessons. And Ms. Winkle had told us that, now you'll have to be up here with the girls, so they won't let them come up there to practice without you here. I said, why don't you just take organ lessons? So my wife began to take organ lessons. And they took lessons from her for quite a while, and then they took advanced organ lessons from a lady over in Winsboro at that time. I am proud of my girls. They all take interest in their church. Ann over here, who's sitting here now, but you can't see her, plays the organ in her church and has for the past 25 years. Her husband goes earlier with the pastor out to a town some 10 miles away. He plays the organ every Sunday morning for that service. One Sunday it'd be Methodist service, the next Sunday it'd be a Baptist service in the same church. After he leaves there, he comes back to his church there in Elkhart, and if Ann is on the organ, he works on the piano. If Ann has to get up to lead the choir, she is choir director, then Ron moves over to the organ and accompanies the choir there. My second daughter, Nancy, and all these girls have played, as well as Jane, has played at some time in the Methodist Church in Pittsburg. I don't think any of them have ever paid for doing it, but they played regularly there. Nancy is in Georgia. She belongs to the Presbyterian Church. She has played in our church, say, she was organist over there when they found out she could play. But then she had a son, our grandson, who passed away at the age of 20 from melanoma, and she had to give up that job. But she and her husband sings in the choir every Sunday morning when they can, and night too. But she plays organ when the regular organist cannot be there. Linda has played for a number of years in the Methodist Church. She's played also in the Presbyterian Church in Pittsburgh, and sometimes has to go to Winsboro to play over there for their church when their organist is out of pocket. Linda loves to sing as well as the other girls. So Linda comes over after playing morning service at the Presbyterian Church, comes over and sings in the choir at the Methodist Church here in Pittsburgh. I said, I'm proud of them. I'm proud of their church-related work. I'm proud because they have taken music like they did. I love music. I'm not a singer. I can't read notes. But as I've told someone before, I play the television, the radio, and the phonograph. That's the extent of my musical ability. But I did build an electronic organ for the girls and for Jane to practice on. It does not work now, but there's another organ sitting over here, which I guess wound up with. It was given to me. I have it playing, except the pedals. I can't get down on the floor and work anymore to get down and work on the pedals. But the organ itself plays well now.
What are the biggest changes that you've seen in the church over the 80 years you've been there?
Well, about the biggest changes is probably the heating system. Originally, there were two furnaces down in the basement, and by hot air, it was a hot air heating system. There, in the two aisles going down, just beside the front pews, there was a vents there where the hot air came up. In the room now, which is used as a museum room, I suppose you'd say, that was a pastor's study for many years, and there was a fireplace in there, which heated in there. Later on, they got guests here in Pittsburgh. They had big heaters that set up down near the front of either side of the choir area, and right in front of those big columns there, if you realize where they are. Then at the back, they had two small space heaters. Later on, they decided to cut a hole in the walls up here and have big heaters, which were not too large, but they had a fan which blew the hot air out over the congregation. And then later on, they went and put in the air conditioning system, which they had the heat there at the same time. That was about the biggest change that I've seen in this church. There are other changes, but some may not be for the best, some will be in my eye, but anyway, they were done. But I've enjoyed my years in church. I suppose at times coming pretty close to an end, but I still enjoy it. My hearing is poor, very poor. In fact, I have a hearing aid here, which you probably hear it on this sound here. The volume control is out of whack on it. The hearing aid which I had there to match the one on the other side played out just as soon as the one-year guarantee was out. And I haven't got the nerve up to go and get a new set yet.
What words of wisdom do you have for the future generations at the church?
I don't know whether I can give a proper answer for that or not. All I can say is love your church, support it, and do what you can to make it grow. and do the job it's supposed to do. I think that's about as well as I could say it.
Is there anything else you'd like to pass on before we finish?
Well, I think I've talked about it long enough here. I don't know that I have anything particular that I should say. I go to church when I can. My hearing is such that I cannot understand what the announcements, what the pastor says. But I go to support the church. I don't blame my hearing necessarily on anything. It might be partly on the sound system. It might be partly on the acoustics in the church. But then again, I think that most of it is in my physical part of hearing right here. I don't enjoy my TV programs anymore and trying to listen to music. Sometimes I can understand it and enjoy it, but other times some of the notes are missing.
Well, thanks for sharing.
I'm happy to be here, be part of it.